real stories of werewolves of Dogman history from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
The Dogman and the Glitching Leprechaun. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a weird Dogman story that happened to me on St. Patrick's Day back when I was a teenager in the 1980s. It was in the middle of the night in the woods behind our house. I had run out there for reasons I'll get back to, but it led unexpectedly to an encounter with what I'm gonna call a Dogman. At the time, I wouldn't have known what to call it. I was too scared to breathe. The massive creature in front of me, a hulking, muscle-bound beast covered in thick black fur, stood on two legs, its snout curled in a low rumbling snarl. Its eyes burned a deep hellish yellow, locked onto something far smaller. That thing in green. The werewolf-like Dogman was easily 7 or 8 feet tall, towering over the tiny figure. But the size difference didn't seem to matter. The little man, barely 3 feet high, stood perfectly still, staring up at the beast with an unsettling, knowing grin. His face was wrinkled and plastic, like a face mask come to life, and his 2 wide eyes gleamed in the moonlight. Then, the freaky little guy glitched. I saw it clearly. 1 second he was standing in front of the Dogman, and the next, he wasn't exactly. He skipped, like a broken film reel, reappearing 1.5 feet to the left, his body momentarily blurred, as if reality itself was struggling to keep him in place. The Dogman hesitated. I could tell he had seen it too. A cold sweat dripped down my back as I clutched a tree trunk for support. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had followed that little thing into the woods, chasing the mystery, convinced I was about to uncover some lost folktale come to life. But now, standing frozen in the clearing, I realized I wasn't uncovering anything. I was caught in the middle of something I couldn't possibly understand. The werewolf-like creature tensed. The gnome or leprechaun, still grinning, clutched something tightly to its chest. A black pot-shaped object emitting a mostly golden glow from its top. But this glow was wrong, shifting colors like an old TV set, struggling to find the right channel. I wanted to scream or run. I wanted to do anything but stand there. And then, the werewolf lunged. But wait, let me start this at the beginning. The first time I saw the little gnome or leprechaun that night, he was outside my bedroom window as I was trying to sleep. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and I wasn't sure why I woke up. But I knew something felt off. You know that feeling, like when someone's watching you. It crept up my spine before I even opened my eyes. At first I thought my half-asleep brain was playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. A small, dark shape on the other side of the window, standing perfectly still. I froze. The house light outside gave just enough glow for me to make out this pointy-hatted figure. It was short, maybe the size of a child, but something was wrong about its proportions. The head was too big, the limbs slightly off, and it was wearing all green. My breath caught in my throat as the man-like figure raised one hand, thin, almost claw-like, and I swear he waved at me. The grin on his face stretched too wide. I blinked my eyes and it was gone. Not run away, not ducked out of sight. It was just gone. For a long moment I lay there, hard hammering. Had I imagined this? Was this a dream? A trick of the light? And then outside, I heard it laughing. This was not a normal laugh. This was not a child's giggle or even an old man's chuckle. It was a weird, choppy sound, like it was being played back on a damaged tape. And somehow I knew I was gonna get up and follow it. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else pulling me outside. But for some reason I found myself throwing on my jacket and sneakers and slipping out the back door. The moment I stepped into the yard, I saw it again. The gnome, just standing there, halfway between my house and the woods. It was waiting for me. And then, it turned and it ran. And like an idiot, I ran after him. The little man bolted through the trees, moving at a speed that shouldn't have been possible with his tiny legs. Without thinking, I sprinted after him, my instincts firing off in all directions. Was this a dream? A hallucination? Or was I really chasing a tiny green-suited figure through the woods in the dead of night? The forest closed in around us, thick and unrelenting. Branches whipped against my arms, my face, and I didn't slow down. I couldn't slow down. I needed to see where he was going. I needed to know what he was. At first things seemed pretty normal. My breath came hard, my heartbeat pounded in my ears, and the little man stayed just ahead. Never too far, but never too close either. His movements were quick, darting over roots and fallen logs like he had been born in these woods. And maybe he was. But then, something shifted. The rhythm of his steps felt weird, not in a way I could immediately pinpoint, but enough to send a cold trickle of unease through me. It was subtle, so subtle that my brain kept adjusting for it, smoothing over the inconsistencies like a bad frame rate in a video game. A stutter here, a jump there, nothing big enough to make me stop. But the deeper I ran, the stranger it got. One moment the gnome was ducking beneath a low branch. The next he was 5 feet ahead, already past it, with no transition in between. It wasn't a blur of motion or a trick of the eyes. It was just 1 second he was here, and the next second he was there, as if my brain had skipped a frame of reality. I kept running, but the air grew heavier, thick with something I still can't name. The sounds of the forest faded. No crickets, no birds, no frogs, no rustling leaves. Just the pounding of my footsteps and the pull of my breath. My own body felt delayed, like I was a step behind myself. Then up ahead of me, I saw the little man stop. We had reached a clearing. Moonlight spilled down through the trees, illuminating him in a pale glow. He stood perfectly still, his back to me, holding that pot glowing gold, his shoulders rising and falling with each breath. I slowed my pulse hammering, and then the creature turned. He looked at me, and he smiled. But then I realized we weren't alone. The moment I turned, I saw it. A massive, hulking shape stood at the tree line, just barely visible in the moonlight. This was the Dogman. It hadn't snapped a twig or rustled a leaf, and yet somehow I knew it was there, and it was staring past me into the empty clearing where the little man stood holding that strange, glowing, pot-shaped object. Even in the dim light, I could see it breathing, each breath slow and deliberate. It wasn't panting, and it wasn't growling. It was just watching. For a brief, insane moment, I wondered if the Dogman had been chasing the leprechaun too. Then its head turned, and those glowing yellow eyes locked onto me. The weight of its gaze hit me like a physical force. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but my feet stayed rooted to the ground. My mind raced, calculating my odds, which were not good. This thing was built like a nightmare, every muscle honed for predatory efficiency. Clawed hands hung loosely at its sides, long fingers twitching silently. It hadn't moved. Yet, it was still deciding what to do about me. I swallowed hard, my throat as dry as sandpaper. The wrong move could end me in an instant. The silence stretched. Then, it shifted. The Dogman shifted. Not a full step, just the faintest lean forward, a shift in weight. But that was enough to jolt me back into my body, enough to remind me that I needed to get out of there. But before I could even think about running, the Dogman's ears flicked. Its nose twitched, taking in the air. Something about this clearing unsettled it. Slowly, it lowered its head toward the spot where the little man stood. The ground there still shimmered faintly, a heat wave ripple that made my stomach turn. I hadn't noticed it before, but now that I saw it, it was weird. like a patch of reality had been left unfinished and was still processing. The dogman exhaled through its nose, making a low rumbling sound, and I realized it was growling. Its hackles rose slightly, tension rippling down its massive frame. It didn't like this. I began to hear a second growling noise, and I realized this one was coming from the leprechaun. Both creatures were growling at each other. And then, the dogman turned to look at me again. Not just look, assess. I had the sudden, horrible realization that it wasn't just deciding whether to kill me. It was deciding whether I even belonged there. My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it. I forced myself not to move, not to breathe too hard. The creature stood there unmoving for what felt like an eternity. Then, finally, it made its choice. The dogman turned. One powerful stride, then another, muscles shifting beneath thick fur as it moved with effortless grace. And then, with absolutely no warning, the huge hairy beast lunged forward, striking out toward the freaky little green-clothed man-like thing, who was then suddenly about 1.5 feet further away from the dogman than he had been less than 1 second prior. I had not seen it move between the two spots. 1 second it was standing in one place, and in the next it was too far away for the dogman to grasp. Again, the large werewolf-like creature struck out at the tiny man with his long, sharp, clawed, paw-like hands. Again, the little gnome managed to be somewhere else at the key moment, while never having done anything to save or protect himself as far as I could see. It looked like a movie with frames missing. That was the closest thing I could compare it to at the time. These days I would compare it to video glitching out, I guess. Neither is a perfect comparison, but both sort of convey the basic feeling of the event, as it was happening to me and in front of me. At some point the leprechaun began to laugh loud enough that I could hear him from where I was crouched and watching. He began to run half circles in front of and around the dogman. Then eventually I saw him run complete circles around the large upright canine beast. The werewolf at first reacted wildly, trying to grab the tiny freakish man, but finding that it was never where it appeared to be. More than one time I saw the dogman's claws close around the creature, only to find that the little guy was suddenly standing a couple or 3 feet away. It was like he was teleporting, but it didn't look like he was actually extending any effort at all. I guess it seemed more like random chance kept saving him, but I don't really know what I was witnessing, to be honest. Maybe it was illusion, maybe it was magic, or maybe it was a kind of a science advanced enough to appear like magic to me. To me and the dogman both, in this case. I have to say the werewolf-like creature seemed as confused and annoyed by the leprechaun as I was, but he definitely was not as frightened by all this as I was. The dogman seemed determined to solve this puzzle, and he seemed as certain that he would eventually win out, as he had been when initially entering the field of battle. I watched all this for what had to have been hours, because I could see the beginnings of the sky changing color for dawn, as the dogman appeared to gain the upper hand in the fighting. I witnessed him landing blow after blow on the very surprised-looking gnome, who took some of these punches that probably would have broken multiple bones if I had to endure them. Although the leprechaun did not appear severely injured by the dogman landing these attacks, he certainly wasn't happy about them either. I noticed the small creature man wasn't laughing anymore. By this point, he had started to look a bit worried, in fact. Something about seeing the evil little gnome looking scared made me feel 10 times as frightened. I turned around looking for my home in the brightening light of the early dawn, but as I stood up to walk back, I found my knees buckling underneath me. I was still not past my initial shock, apparently. From my knees I watched as the leprechaun began to run away in the opposite direction from me. It looked more solidly there by that point. It was not skipping frames so much anymore. Maybe doing that required energy, and maybe the little man was getting tired out. At any rate, I saw that leprechaun run off, clutching his glowing metal container, and I watched the dogman trot after him. It seemed the tide in the battle had turned, and I wondered how this fight was going to turn out. Unfortunately, I knew I was not going to be running after them, and I was not going to be seeing any more of that battle. As the two strange creatures disappeared from my sight, the woods seemed to start to return to something more like normal. I didn't move until the sounds of the forest slowly crept back in. Rustling leaves, distant chirps of insects, the song of the morning birds. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. But the air still felt wrong, and I still felt scared. As I made my way back home, I wondered if my mom and dad would be up yet. When I got close enough to see the house, I could clearly see the two of them sitting at the kitchen table. Oh, brother, I realized I was in trouble. Still in too much of a shaken-up state to even consider lying about what happened, I began to compose my thoughts in my head. I wasn't making up a lie. I was just trying to organize my truth better in my head, so as to make my case quickly before the yelling and punishments began. As I walked in the back door, both my parents looked over at me in shock. Then they both turned and looked up at the stairs, presumably at my bedroom. They had thought I was upstairs in my room. They had no idea I had just had an adventure out in the woods behind the house. Well, I started to tell them what happened. At first they just stared at me wide-eyed. Then they stared at each other for a while after that. At some point, though, the two of them cracked up, and everything I said just seemed funny to them. In the opinion of my parents, I had just had a nightmare. I insisted that I was not dreaming, that I had followed an evil-looking gnome into the woods. A gnome carrying a pot of gold like a leprechaun, my dad pointed out. Yeah, so? I asked. Dad pointed to the calendar. The date was March 17th. It was St. Patrick's Day, a holiday that some people associate with leprechauns. To me, in my teenage years, this just seemed like a coincidence. To my parents, however, it was proof that I had imagined the entire episode. Even as an adult, I failed to see their logic. I had never celebrated St. Patrick's Day, and my family is only a little Irish on my father's side 2 generations back. I don't see why I would imagine a scene so crazy, or a scene so detailed, since I had never put any thought into the holiday before. I also was not a cryptid nut either, although I did enjoy monster movies, and I had seen Legend of Boggy Creek, and I had also seen Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of. I knew about Bigfoot, but I only began to hear stories about the Dogman once I started telling people about what I had witnessed in those woods on that night. My parents would mock me at family gatherings for the rest of their lives, God love them. They would retell the story of how I really believed I had seen a leprechaun, but obviously in their minds I was still asleep and half dreaming, even as I talked to them in the kitchen that morning. That was how they interpreted it. Me sleepwalking. Me talking in my sleep. That doesn't even make sense to me, but to them it didn't just make sense. It was hilarious. They would tell the story to relatives and everyone would laugh at me. I learned that if I defended myself in any way as the story was told and retold, that would only make everyone laugh at me that much harder and louder. So I learned to sit quiet and suck up the pain as the true story of my one cryptid encounter was butchered over and over, year after year, at family gatherings during holidays and birthdays. I'd bite my tongue and I'd say a silent curse to that glitching gnome, that evil leprechaun who had caused me to be mocked over and over for half the rest of my life. Well, I may not have celebrated St. Patrick's Day before this happened, but I have observed it every year since then, and I've never seen the leprechaun return. If I were you, I'd make a toast to that evil little gnome, and I'd take a sip of something before I went to bed tonight, because I have a strong feeling that if you acknowledge him and his holiday, then you will not get a visit from the Dogman and the glitching leprechaun. No matter where you are, or when, or why, or if, there is no finer executive producer than dear Sabrina Midkiff.
Please join me in thanking channel member Sabrina Midkiff for making this episode possible with a kind donation to our channel using the thanks button located under each of our YouTube videos. As a channel member, Sabrina gets to see our weekly secret uncensored episodes, including the 2 new stories we're about to drop this week. For more information about how you can help this channel stay online, like the heroic and beloved Sabrina Midkiff, here's our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.